Hello. Today I'm going to tell you a story that may sound familiar to everyone. What if the person closest to you asks for help, but that help turns out to be the biggest deception of your life? This is the story of Henry, a kind pensioner who has always lived for his family. Don't miss a minute to find out how everything changed for him after one request. Thanks for subscribing. Henry was 70 years old and had worked at a local factory in a small town in Pennsylvania all his life. After retirement, he was finally able to enjoy his quiet life tending his garden, going fishing, and reading the newspaper on his front porch. He lived alone, but he did not feel lonely. And his main pride and joy was his 20-year-old grandson, Thomas. Thomas was the first person in their family to enter a prestigious university. Henry told everyone he met about it. My grandson is a future lawyer. Can you imagine? A lawyer from our family, he would often tell his friends at a local cave. Thomas always seemed like an ideal to him, polite, intelligent, ambitious. Although Henry lived on a modest pension, he never spared any money to help Thomas if he needed it. One day, Henry woke up early as usual. He drank his cup of coffee, fed the birds in the garden, and sat on the porch with the newspaper. Suddenly his phone rang. It was Thomas. Hi, Grandpa. How are you? His grandson said. I'm fine, Thomas. And how are you doing? How's school? Henry replied with warmth in his voice. Everything is fine, but I wanted to talk to you. Can I come over tonight? Thomas asked. Henry was excited because he always loved it when his grandson visited him. Of course you can come over. I'll make your favorite pie, he said. In the evening, Thomas arrived. Henry greeted him with hugs and put a freshly baked apple pie on the table. Sit down. Tell me how you are. You look a little worried, Henry said. Thomas sighed and answered. Grandpa, I always knew I could count on you. I have a very difficult situation at the university right now. Henry listened intently, leaning forward. I need money to pay for my studies. Otherwise I might get expelled. Henry was a little confused. He had always thought that Thomas received a scholarship that covered all his expenses. Doesn't your scholarship cover your tuition? He asked. Thomas quickly found an excusing. It does, but this year they raised the tuition fees, and the scholarship is not enough. I've already tried to find other options, but nothing is working. Henry could see how nervous his grandson was. He didn't want to ask too many questions because he trusted him unconditionally. Thomas, don't worry. I can't let you drop out of school. I will help you, Henry said. Thomas breathed a sigh of relief and thanked him sincerely. Thank you, Grandpa. You are the best. I promise I'll pay you back when I graduate and start working. Henry felt proud to be able to support his grandson at such an important time. After Thomas left, Henry sat in his living room and thought about how important it is to help your loved ones. This is an investment in his future. He will achieve great things, he told himself. But deep inside, there was a small feeling of unease. What if Thomas wasn't telling the whole story? Did he really need the money for his studies? The next morning after his conversation with Thomas, Henry woke up feeling the importance of what had happened. He had no doubt that he had made the right choice in deciding to help his grandson. A family is the most important thing, he kept telling himself as he ate breakfast. But the thought of finances still worried him. Henry decided to discuss the details with Thomas and find out how much money he needed. The same day, Thomas came to Henry's house again. He looked a little nervous, but he was still smiling. Grandpa, I am so grateful that you are willing to help me, he began. Tell me exactly how much it will take to fix this, Henry asked, placing a cup of coffee in front of his grandson. Thomas took a deep breath. It's a lot of money. The semester fees have gone up, and with the additional expenses, I need $20,000. Henry froze for a moment. It was a huge sum for a retired man who lived on a modest pension and savings. $20,000. He asked again, trying to hide his shock. I know it's a lot, Thomas said hastily, but it's only temporary. I can pay you back as soon as I start working." Henry began to remember how hard he had worked all his life to save that money. It was supposed to be used for his retirement, maybe for a trip he had always dreamed of taking. But he looked at Thomas, who looked so young and full of hope. "I can't say no to him. He is my grandson. If I don't help him, who will?" Henry thought. "All right, Thomas, I'll give you the money," Henry said, looking his grandson in the eye. Thomas jumped up and hugged him. "Grandpa, you have no idea how much this means to me. I will never let you down." I know, boy," Henry replied, smiling but still feeling doubtful inside. The next day, Henry went to the bank. He explained to the manager that he wanted to transfer a large sum of money to his grandson's account. Are you sure it's safe? Have you checked all the details?" Henry nodded, although he felt anxious. "This is my grandson. I trust him," he said. The manager didn't say anything, but his look was meaningful. That evening, Thomas called Henry to tell him that the money had arrived. "Grandpa, you're a real hero. You saved me. I promise I will make you proud," he said with sincerity in his voice. Henry was relieved. This is the best decision," he thought. But a few days later, Henry accidentally saw a photo of Thomas on Facebook. He was standing with his friends on an expensive yacht. Was this a joke? How is this possible when he said he was having financial problems? Henry thought. He decided not to jump to conclusions, but his anxiety returned. Henry decided to call Thomas to ask about the photo. "You're Thomas. You said all the money was going to go to school. What kind of yacht is this?" he asked. "Oh, Grandpa, it's just a weekend activity. It's nothing serious," Thomas replied, but he sounded unsure. Henry hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. Was Thomas really using the money for its intended purpose? Or is this the beginning of a bigger deception? For several days after the money transfer, Henry tried to calm himself down, convincing himself that he had made the right choice. But after he saw the photo of Thomas on the yacht, his anxiety began to turn into suspicion. It was just a coincidence. Maybe his friends invited him. But what if they didn't? Henry thought as he sat on the porch of his house. Thomas called less often, and his answers to Henry's questions seemed short and vague. "Henry, how's school, Thomas?" Henry asked during one of his calls. "It's going well, Grandpa. I have a lot of work to do right now," his grandson replied, and Henry felt that he wanted to end the conversation quickly. Henry remembered how Thomas used to talk enthusiastically about lectures and professors. Why is he avoiding talking about the university now? He thought. One day Henry went into town to buy some groceries. He was standing in line at the store when he saw Thomas on the other side of the street. Thomas was coming out of an expensive car dealership with the keys in his hand. Next to him was a young girl who was laughing and holding his hand. Henry could not believe his eyes. Is this my grandson? What is he doing in a place like this? He thought. Henry decided to talk to Thomas about what he had seen. That evening he called him. "Thomas, I saw you in town today. What were you doing at the car dealership?" Henry asked. Thomas hesitated. I was just accompanying a friend. He was buying a car and I was helping him," he answered. "And who was the girl?" Henry continued. "It was just an acquaintance, Grandpa." "Don't worry, it's okay," Thomas said hastily. Henry hung up the phone, but his suspicions only grew. The next day, Henry met his old friend Roger, who worked at a local bank, at a cafe. "How are you, Henry?" "I heard you helped your grandson with his studies," Roger said. Yes, I sent him money for university," Henry replied. "Roger University. How strange. I saw Thomas at the casino the other day. He didn't look like he was thinking about studying there." These words were the last straw for Henry. Henry decided to check the information about the university where Thomas said he was studying. He went to the university's website and tried to find information about a student named Thomas Hansen, but the search came up empty. "This can't be true. Maybe I'm looking for something wrong," he said to himself, but his hands were shaking. Henry found in his mailbox the invoice Thomas had sent him earlier. He decided to call the university's accounting department to find out if it was really an official document. We don't have a student like that on our roster. The woman on the other end of the line replied. Henry felt the ground slipping from under his feet. Henry realized he had to tread carefully. He didn't want to blame Thomas right away, but now he needed answers. He decided to invite his grandson over for dinner and talk to him in a calm environment. I will find out the truth, even if it is painful, he told himself. That evening, Henry sat in his living room preparing for the conversation. What are you hiding, Thomas? And are you ready to tell me the truth? He thought as he looked at the photo of his grandson on the wall. Henry felt that the truth was close, but at the same time he was afraid of what he might find out. His suspicions about Thomas were growing every day. He decided to find more evidence before speaking to his grandson directly. If this is really a hoax, I need to know everything, he told himself as he looked through the documents Thomas had left him. Henry began to look closely at the receipts that Thomas had brought to prove his tuition expenses. Why were there no university stamps on them? And why don't some of the dates match? He thought, noticing that the bills looked suspicious. Henry took a picture of the documents with his phone and decided to show them to his friend Roger, who had a background in finance. The next day, Henry met with Roger at the same cafe. Roger, look at these receipts. They look genuine, Henry asked, handing over the papers. Roger looked at them carefully and shook his head. Henry, they're fake. The paper is wrong, and the format of the bills does not meet university standards. Henry felt his heart sink. Were you sure? He asked. Absolutely, my friend. You should be careful, Roger replied. When Henry got home, he decided to check Thomas' social media profile. He found several photos that his grandson had posted over the past few weeks. In one picture, Thomas was sitting at a casino table with a pile of chips. In another, he was holding a bottle of expensive champagne. So much for financial difficulties, Henry said with a bitter smile. The next morning, Henry decided to act decisively. He drove to the university where Thomas said he studied. Do you have a student named Thomas Hansen? The woman at the desk politely replied, No, we don't have a student like that. Are you sure this is the right university? Henry realized that his suspicions were confirmed. When he returned home, Henry collected all the evidence he could find: fake receipts, photos from social media, and responses from the university. How could you, Thomas? How could you do this to me? He said out loud, looking at the photo of his grandson on the shelf. Henry felt angry, sad, and disappointed at the same time. He remembered how much he trusted Thomas, how proud he was of him. Was it my fault? Did I spoil him too much? He asked himself as he sat in the dark living room. But he knew he had to stay calm and talk to Thomas. Henry decided to invite Thomas to dinner, but this time he was ready for an open conversation. Or if he lied, he had to admit it. I can't let him keep lying to me, Henry thought. He called Thomas and said, Grandson, come over for dinner tomorrow. We need to talk. Thomas agreed, not realizing that his lie had already been exposed. That night, Henry couldn't sleep for a long time. Tomorrow I'll find out if he has any honesty left in him, he said to himself as he looked at his watch. The evening Henry had been waiting for with anxiety and determination. His heart beat faster as he arranged the dishes on the table. Thomas had agreed to come to dinner, not realizing that his deception had already been discovered. Henry looked at the chair where his grandson always sat and thought, Today I will learn the truth, even if it is painful. Thomas came in a good mood with a big smile on his face. Hi, Grandpa, what are we having for dinner tonight? He asked as he sat down at the table. Your favorite dishes, Thomas. But before we start, I'd like to talk to you, Henry replied, sitting down across from him. Thomas visibly tense but tried to remain calm. What's wrong, Grandpa? Henry pulled out the documents he had prepared, fake receipts, photos from social media, and a response from the university. Thomas, I've always trusted you, but lately I've started to notice that something is wrong. And this is what I found, he said, putting the papers in front of his grandson. Thomas looked at them and his face turned pale. What is this, grandfather? He asked, trying to buy time. These are the proofs of your lies. You said you needed money for your studies, but you're not even a student at this university, Henry said firmly. Thomas was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. Grandpa, I can explain everything. Began, but Henry interrupted him. Explain. I want to hear the truth. Thomas finally confessed yes, I lied. I'm not at the university anymore. I was expelled a year ago. Expelled? Why didn't you say anything? Apu? Henry asked, not believing his ears. And I didn't want to disappoint you. I thought I could fix everything on my own. But then I ran out of money, and I started lying, Thomas said, lowering his head. Henry could not contain his emotions. You didn't want to disappoint me. What about the fact that you lied to me and took my money? This is not just a disappointment. This is a betrayal, Thomas, he shouted. Grandpa, I thought I could pay it all back. I tried to earn money, but Thomas stopped talking, realizing that his excuses sounded pathetic. You spent it on parties, expensive things, and casinos. Is that what you spent my savings on? Henry continued, his voice trembling with anger. Thomas tried to defend himself. Grandpa, I know I made a mistake, but I really wanted to make it right. You had a chance to tell me the truth, Thomas, but you chose to lie, and now I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Henry replied, his voice full of pain. Thomas lowered his head, not knowing what to say. Henry stood up from the table. You have to leave, Thomas. I need time to figure out how to move on after this, he said, pointing to the door. Thomas stood up, his eyes filled with tears. Grandpa, I'm really sorry. I want to make it right, he said before walking away. Henry stood silently watching the door close. After Thomas left, Henry was alone in the dark room. Is he really sorry? Or is it just another lie? He thought, looking at the picture of his grandson on the wall. When Thomas left, Henry was left alone with the empty house and his thoughts. His heart was clenched with pain. How could he do this to me? I trusted him more than anyone, Henry thought as he sat in his chair. This betrayal felt like not only a loss of money, but also a break in the bond he had built over the years. Every corner of the house reminded him of Thomas. A framed photo of his grandson, his old books, even the chair at the table where he always sat. How did we get to this point? What did I do wrong? Henry asked himself, looking at the empty seat at the table. He remembered how Thomas used to tell him about his dreams, about how he wanted to succeed and make his grandfather proud. Those were just words, Henry whispered, feeling his eyes fill with tears. In addition to the emotional pain, Henry faced serious financial problems. Though all of his savings, which he had accumulated over the years, had been spent on a lie. He sat with a notepad trying to draw up a new budget. This money is barely enough for the next month. What am I going to do next? He thought. The idea that he might lose his home, which was his only refuge, seemed terrifying. Henry decided to share his feelings with Roger, his old friend. Roger, I gave him everything I had. I don't know if I'll ever recover, Henry said as he sat down for a cup of coffee. Henry, I know how much this hurts, but you have to remember that money can be returned, but trust, that's something else entirely, Roger replied. I just don't understand how he could do this to me. I raised him as my own son, Henry said, his voice trembling. Henry began to remember how much time he had spent with Thomas, teaching him how to fish, reading him books at night, and helping him with his homework. He was such a good boy. What went wrong? Henry thought as he looked through the old photos. Each memory brought pain, but also reminded him how much he loved his grandson. Henry began to feel a deep loneliness. Thomas was the only person close to him who came to see him often. Now the house seemed even more empty. Even the garden, which he had always been proud of, no longer brought him joy. Maybe I just became a burden to him, and he decided to use me, Henry thought, looking at his hands, which were trembling with fatigue. One evening Henry received a letter. It was from Thomas. Grandpa, I know what I did was terrible, and I realize that I have betrayed your trust, but I want to make it right. I'm working on getting your money back. Just give me time. I'm sorry for everything I've done. Henry looked at the letter for a long time, trying to figure out if Thomas really wanted to make things right or if it was just another attempt at manipulation. Henry felt torn between his heart and his mind. And I can't forgive him now. But is it right to completely abandon him? He asked himself. He knew that his love for his grandson had not disappeared, but he also realized that his trust had been broken. Henry decided not to answer the letter for now. He'll let him show his actions, not his words, he thought as he put the envelope in a drawer. A few weeks passed after the confrontation with Thomas. Henry tried to move on with his life, but feelings of betrayal and loss haunted him. And how did this happen? How did I allow myself to be so trusting? He thought as he sat on the porch of his house. These thoughts did not leave him day or night. Henry began to analyze his life and his relationship with Thomas. Maybe I spoiled him too much. I always wanted him to have what I didn't have. Perhaps that's what made him the way he is, he reasoned. He recalled how, after the death of Thomas' parents, he took on the role of mentor and guardian. I tried to be everything to him, a friend, a teacher, even a playmate. But maybe I failed somewhere, Henry said, looking through old photos. To clear his mind, Henry met with Roger again. Henry, you can't blame yourself for everything. People make their own choices, and you can't always control that, Roger said, putting his hand on his shoulder. But I feel like I didn't raise him right. If I had been stricter, maybe this wouldn't have happened, Henry replied. Roger shook his head. You did everything you could, but now you have to decide how to live your life. Henry read the letter from Thomas several times. I'm working on getting the money back. But is it true? Is he manipulating me again? Henry asked himself. He realized that he could not simply believe the words, but at the same time, his heart did not allow him to completely abandon his grandson. One Sunday morning, Henry decided to go to church, hoping to find answers in his faith. The priest he approached said, "Forgiveness does not mean forgetting the pain, but it can free your soul from the burden of hatred." These words made Henry think. Maybe I should try to forgive, but how do I go about it? He thought. All that evening, Henry sat on the porch and began to recall the happy moments he had spent with his grandson. He remembered when Thomas first learned to ride a bike, when they built a birdhouse in the garden together, when they celebrated his graduation from university. These were real moments of joy. But was it all a lie? He asked himself. Henry decided to attend a support group for people who had been betrayed by their loved ones. There he heard stories of other people who had faced similar situations. I thought it was just my problem, but it turns out that many people have been through this, Henry said after the meeting. It made him realize that he was not alone in his feelings. After much reflection, Henry decided that he had to move on. I can change the past, but I can decide how to respond to it in the future, he told himself. He decided to reply to Thomas's letter, but with the condition that he prove his intentions with actions, not words. Henry wrote a short reply. Thomas, I'm willing to give you a chance to make things right, but it's up to you. Prove that you really want to change. He sent the letter and looked out the window for a long time, wondering if it was the right decision. Henry waited a long time for a response to his letter. But he gave Thomas a chance to prove his intentions, but the old pensioner's heart was divided between hope and fear. Will he really change? Or is this just another attempt to deceive me? Henry thought as he checked his mailbox every day. But he decided that regardless of Thomas' answer, he needed to start a new chapter in his life. A few weeks later, Henry received a letter. Grandpa, I accept your challenge. I found a job in a small restaurant to pay you back. It's hard, but I want to show you that I can make up for my mistakes. Henry read these words several times. His heart was filled with mixed feelings, joy that Thomas might be trying to make amends, and sadness that they had come to this point. Henry decided to give Thomas a chance to prove his sincerity. He wrote back, Thomas, I'm glad you're taking the first step, but remember, this is only the beginning. I trust actions, not words. He also offered to meet in a month to see how things were going. At this time, Henry began to change his life as well. I can't afford to sit alone anymore, he told himself, and joined a local senior citizens club. At the club, he met other people who had their own difficult stories. Their conversations became a source of support and inspiration for Henry. One of his new friends, Marta, shared with him her idea to create a volunteer project to help older people with financial issues. This could be your new beginning, Henry, she said. Henry decided to join the project. He started helping people understand how to protect themselves from financial scams by sharing his story. If my mistake came someone else, then it was not in vain, he said during one of the lectures. His story touched many people. People came up to him after the meetings and thanked him for his honesty. Our other day came to meet his grandson. Thomas came in modest clothes, looking tired, but his eyes radiated determination. Grandpa, I've earned my first money and I want to give it back to you, he said, holding out an envelope of cash. Henry opened the envelope and saw a small amount of money. It's not much, but it's a start, Thomas added, Henry nodding. I can see you're trying. But remember, real change is not just about money, it's about how you live your life. Thomas asked his grandfather for permission to join his volunteer project. I want to help others avoid the mistakes I made. This will be my way of repaying you and making up for my mistakes, he said. Henry agreed, but remained cautious. All right, Thomas, but this is your chance to show me who you want to be. Don't disappoint me a second time, he said. Henry and Thomas started working together. Their project became popular in the city, and more people joined their initiative. For Henry, it was a chance to see his grandson change for the better, and for Thomas, it was an opportunity to rebuild trust and build a new life. That evening, after another lecture, Henry sat on the porch and looked up at the starry sky. Was this the real beginning? Will Thomas and I be able to build a new relationship? He thought, feeling some relief, but leaving room for doubt. Time passed, and Henry's life began to take on new colors. His volunteer project was becoming more and more popular, and working with Thomas brought back the feeling that their connection could be restored. Perhaps this is a new beginning, Henry thought as he looked at the list of participants in their last meeting. But deep down, he knew that not all the questions had been answered. Thomas continued to work at the restaurant, paying his grandfather back in small installments. He no longer spent it on useless things and even started saving. Grandpa, I know it's not enough, but I'm trying, he said during one of their conversations. Henry could see the changes in his grandson, his determination, new responsibility and willingness to work. You are taking steps in the right direction, Thomas. But remember, real trust takes years to build, Henry replied. Their volunteer project attracted the attention of the local press. Journalists invited Henry for an interview where he shared his story. It wasn't easy, but I realized that even the biggest betrayal can be an impetus for change, he said on the air. Thomas sat in the audience and listened to his grandfather's words. He felt both proud and ashamed of his previous actions. Despite his outward success, Henry could not completely shake the pain of what had happened. Will I ever be able to forget this deception? He asked himself as he looked through the photos of Thomas from his childhood. He realized that the pain would not disappear instantly, but he hoped that time would heal the wounds. One day Henry received a letter. It was from a lawyer who represented the company where Thomas had previously worked as a freelancer. We have learned about your volunteer project and would like to offer you financial support to expand your activities. This news surprised Henry. Can something good come out of all this chaos? He thought. When Henry showed the letter to Thomas, who looked stunned. Grandpa, this is incredible. It means we can help even more people, he said. Henry smiled, but adding, yes, Thomas, in AA, but it also means that we have to be honest with ourselves and with others. At a public event, Henry was asked to tell more about his story. How did you manage to forgive your grandson? One of the participants asked. Henry paused and said, forgiveness is not something that happens overnight. It is a process. I can't say I've forgiven him completely, but I can see his efforts, and that gives me hope. Thomas heard these words and realized he still had a long way to go. After the event, Henry and Thomas returned home. "Grandpa, I want you to know that I will never let you down again," Thomas said. Henry looked at him and replied, "It is not our promises that make us better, Thomas. It's our actions." That night, Henry sat on the porch looking up at the stars. "I may not know how it will all end, but I can see that we are moving forward, and that's a lot," he thought. On the table was a letter from the lawyer and a new envelope with money from Thomas. Henry opened it and saw a note. "Grandpa, this is just the beginning. I will work to earn back your trust." Henry smiled, but his thoughts remained conflicted.